Christopher Cross, welcome to noise11.com. It's great to have you here for the very first time.
Well, thanks, Paul. It's nice to talk to you.
On my count, I think this is the third Australian tour for you. Is that all you've done over all these years?
That sounds right. I mean, I know I was down there in like 17 with the Beach Boys, I think, and came back maybe once since then on my own, but two, maybe three times at most. And I haven't been down there too many times. I mean, it's a long drive.
So, well, if you're going to drive it, yes. How did you miss Australia all the way through the 80s?
You know, I guess they focus on the markets where you're strongest, I suppose. And I think I've always had my fans in Australia, but I don't know. You know, this business is every day it becomes a bigger mystery to me than it ever was. I don't know. I never seem to understand it completely. But regardless, I think 17 was the last time, so we're very excited to be coming back again.
And you're coming back with Toto. Now, this is a long, ongoing relationship that you've had with Toto, going way back to the early albums. I think, we go to another page and, basically Steve Lukather and Jeff Porcaro played on All Right. Mike Porcaro was your bass player on that album. So you've got a long history with this band.
Yeah, they also were the band rhythm section on Arthur's theme. So they've been playing for whatever records. Yeah, a long musical relationship and personal relationship as well. Obviously miss Jeffrey and Mike very much. And it's great to be out with the guys. We just did about 6 weeks in Europe. And I think it's a real nice combination. It's totally maybe slightly more rock edge than what I do, but I think it's a nice balance. And I think the show works well. So I think we're actually doing a summer run in the States with Men at Work.
Oh, wow.
So, as well. So I think this music is being rediscovered through the yacht rock thing by younger people. And we're seeing a pretty broad demographic in the crowd,
You're going to have a great time with Colin Hay. He's a very, very funny man.
He is. I always joke, I'll just let Colin come out and do all my banter, He's really good at that stuff. And a great songwriter, but yeah.
Last time I think I saw Colin, there was more banter than song.
Yeah, well, but that's also something that's, it's a rare gift to have. I mean, a lot of songwriters aren't particularly, Brian Ferry, I don't know Brian well at all, but I'm a massive fan. But when you see him in concert, he barely says two words. So same with David Gilmour. So I think it's refreshing to see a guy like Colin who's got that gift of gab,
So we will be hearing a few stories from Christopher Cross, I take it, at the Australian shows.
Well, I hope so. We do a 50-minute show, so it's a little tight. We try to play the hits and get the business done. But yeah, I try to squeeze a few hellos and things in there. Of course, it's nice because the language is the same. But we just got through playing in Europe, so that was a little more challenging. But it's just a great bill. I think it gives us both an opportunity to draw out our individual audiences to the show. We did great business in Europe, and people got a chance to see both of us do our thing. And like I said, it's always a lot of fun touring with Steve and Joe and the band, Greg Fillingane's on keys and all that. A lot of longtime friends there.
As you say, you do a lot of the hits, and there's a lot of the Christopher Cross album, a lot of the Another Page album, but you're still a very prolific writer and recording artist. Secret Ladder, Dr. Faith were two of the most recent albums that you had. They make an appearance, don't they?
God bless you. Well, I think it's hard. With 50 minutes, I kind of play the hits, which I feel like I owe to the people, and then I managed to squeeze in maybe one what we call deep cuts from things like Dr. Faith, and it changes every night. In other words, we have a little list of deep cut songs that we rotate in, but usually only play one of those a night. But there's songs I'm very, very proud of. Like I said, I've made 12 records so far. And just like having kids, the younger one gets all the attention and all that stuff. And so artists are particularly proud of their later work, the latest work they put out, even though it may not be as commercially successful,
Well, songs from that album, when I see them in a playlist, they actually just blend in. You've maintained a style over 45 years that hasn't gone away. There was another recent album, Take Me As I Am, your 2017 album, what I really loved about that album, it's mostly instrumental, but it highlights you as the musician.
Well, that was because very kind of you. Well, it's because a lot of people were asking me to do a guitar record, because I'm a guitarist, but I didn't feel really comfortable making a totally instrumental record like Steve Lukather could, or Eric Johnson or Larry Carlton. So I decided to make this hybrid record where the choruses of the songs, as you know, they're sung, but the rest of it, there's no lyrics, it's all instrumental. So I hope it kind of satisfied that what fans were wanting, but I I love the record. I think it's something that I've wanted to do for a long time and kind of express my, my instrumentality, but also leave enough, put enough lyrics in there where they gives you this essence of what the song's about.
It has a jazz leaning to it. Is that where your personal tastes lie?
Yeah, they do. I mean, I certainly listen mostly to, Miles Davis, Charlie Parker, that kind of stuff, more jazz and classical music. But I've moved that way with my live band too. It's like, well, matter of fact, Toto, those that kind of quality musicians. So my current touring band, most of them are from Paris, but they're all seriously trained jazz guys. And so the show is pretty sophisticated. I feature the musicians a lot, like it is on Take Me Out I Am. In fact, Andy Suzuki that played sax on the records on the tour, and so I feature them a lot. So it's a genre I love, and I love the influence of that. Even though I'm a pop writer, I love to infuse sort of the jazz influence into the music. I Sting does that to a great degree very well too.
I guess, when we track back that jazz origins for you, even on that very first album where Michael McDonald was working on, both those albums, but did you have a history with Michael prior to recording your first album?
No, he was recording Taken to the Streets in the adjacent Warner Brothers studio, and my producer, Michael Lamardian, who had worked with Michael McDonald on Steely Dan records, went over and said, "Hey, I'm producing this kid from Texas. Why don't you come over and take a listen?" And Mike McDonald came over, and as he so much is, he graciously offered, he liked what he heard, and graciously offered to lend his voice. And that's the way Mike is. He's not a guy who's calculated thinking, well, this kid's nobody. Should I be singing on this? He was more drawn by the music. And so we were able to get him on a couple cuts, and then Mike and I just really hit it off as people, and we've remained incredibly close friends all these years. And our kids grew up together and stuff like that. So he's continued to sing on things as years gone on. But that's how it all got started. Was really the introduction through Marty and the connection with Steely Dan. Getting back to the jazz thing, because I'm a major Steely Dan fan, and Donald and Walter are obviously very influenced by jazz.
Was it true that they asked you to appear on one of their albums and you knocked it back?
I didn't knock it back. What happened was Gary Katz, the producer, called me and said, "Hey, they'd like you to play on something," because I guess Donald had heard Ride Like the Wind and like the solo at the end. And I was sort of half terrified, but half excited. And then it turned out, and Gary told me that they got something on that song that they liked, but they maybe would like me to do something else. And so I was half relieved, because they're tough. I mean, they can have as many as 10 guitar players on a song, and then they never use any of them. But as it turns out, I think I found out later that the song they wanted me to play on at the time was a song called Third World Man off Gaucho. And all I said when I found out was, thank God I did not play it, because Larry Carlton plays arguably one of the most incredible solos of all time on that. And I certainly wouldn't have brought that to it. So the greatest part about this story is that I get to claim that they asked me, but I didn't have to actually embarrass myself.
Is it true that you were once filling in for Richie Blackmore in Deep Purple?
The only person, Richie called me and asked me to be part of a documentary about him, because he said, "You're the only person that ever subbed for me." He said, "We clapped in, a lot of people sat in, but he got sick in San Antonio on their first show in the US. He got sick, couldn't play. I was a local guitarist who was known to be a big fan of Richie's. And so they asked me if I'd sit in with the band, and the band decided that it was more important to play the show than to cancel their first show. And so I got up and did my best. I knew some of the hits and stuff and played. And it was a real thrill and super exciting. And then the next day when they left, I went to the airport, got to meet Richie and everything. So yeah, but he says to this day that lots of people have sat in, but no one's ever subbed for him but me. So that's another claim to fame I have.
Well, that's my second favorite fill-in story, and this one is fact, because Engelbert Humperdinck told me this to my face in the room, that once upon a time his guitarist got sick, and Jimi Hendrix, who was his opening act, filled in Engelbert's band.
Well, I can't compete with that, but that's a fantastic story. Well, you go with what you got at the time, and if all you got is Jimi Hendrix, well, then I think my situation is a little different. I was, I subbed, but I wasn't Jimi Hendrix. But that's a great story. I don't know Engelbert, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the unknown kid being yourself when you were recording those early albums. How does the unknown kid get Larry Carlton, Nicolette Larson, Don Henley, J.D. Souther, Carl Wilson, Carla Bonoff, Art Garfunkel to come onto his records?
Well, the first album, as I said, Mardian got Michael to do that, and Mardian also arranged for introduced Larry Carlton. I got Carlton, but Nicolette Larson was on the label, and so that kind of cross-label pollination happened. Valerie Carter too was kind of connected with Lenny Waronker, who's head of Warner Brothers, and I sent Nicolette the song, and I sent Valerie the song, and they liked it and did it. But Don Henley, I'm from Texas, and Don's from Linden, Texas. I'm from San Antonio, so I've known Don for years, and Don was very supportive. When I got my, getting my deal and me getting signed and everything, and offered, he doesn't do it very often, but offered to sing on my record. And when he came down to the studio, he told me, I said, well, who's going to sing the third part? And he said, well, I'm having breakfast with this guy and I'll bring him along. And so I got off the phone and I was a little moping around. I thought, well, because I was spoiled at that point, Larry Carlton, all these people. I'm like, well, I don't want to bring in just some guy, who's this guy, and my producer said, just relax. I'm sure they can sing. And of course, Don walks in with JD Salinger. They've been having breakfast. And he told JD, I'm going to sing on this kid's record from Texas. I'll buy you breakfast if you sing. And JD said, okay. So all those things just sort of fell in place. And then, of course, the second album is when I got Carl and Art and those people. And that was, of course, I had the entree. I had a big record. I could call people up. And I was thrilled to call up Artie, and he came and sang. But again, I sent him the song and he liked it. And then, of course, Carl, who's my mentor vocally, I emulate everything from him. That was the thrill of a lifetime to call Carl, meet him, have him come to the studio. And we did a lot of stuff over the years together. We did David Lee Roth cover of California Girls. We did all those backgrounds. So meeting Carl and becoming friends with him was a lifetime dream.
When we think about Arthur's theme, the song that you did for the Dudley Moore movie. Now, what I know about Christopher Cross is that you were basically a standalone songwriter. You weren't writing with anyone else. And then suddenly you're writing with Carol Bayer Sager, with Burt Bacharach, with Peter Allen. What was that experience like?
Well, you're right. I wasn't really a collaborative artist, but I tell you, when Burt Bacharach calls, I mean, you go. I consider him to be the greatest songwriter of my generation. And so what happened was Burt was going to be scoring the film, and he and Carol called up and said, we need a theme, would you want to come write it? So I went up to their house. They were married at the time, in beautiful house in Beverly Hills, and about midnight. And we just sat down and it just worked magically. Bert's a genius, a harmonic genius. And so, worked on the music with Bert and the lyric with Carol. And Peter's involvement was interesting because Peter was actually in Australia, but we were looking at rushes of the movie and looking at the lyrics and stuff like this, and something about the moon. And so Carol said, look, there's this song I was writing with Peter years ago. We just kind of had some sketches, and there's a great line, when you get caught to the moon in New York City, let me call Peter. So she called Peter in Australia and said, what do you think about us using this line in this song? And he said, well, it's been laying around forever. We're probably never going to finish the song, so go ahead. And from what I understand, I was close to Peter. I miss him terribly. He and I did the City Entertainment Center opening together. But anyway, what I understand, Peter was on a hold over JFK, and his partner was waiting for him at the airport. And it was a long hold. He was anxious to see his partner, and he came up with the idea and said, when you get caught to the moon in New York City, and that's where that came from. And of course, the biggest line of the song, but he kind of did it remotely, So, but that's how songwriting works. Whatever. Sometimes it's just a small thing, but in his case, it was a small thing, but the biggest line in the song. So,
what was your line in the song?
Oh, well, the rest of it, Carol and I just kind of sat down and, wrote songs like you do with the yellow pad, and I can't remember. I mean, we just kind of wrote the song together. But in this case, we were working on something with the moon and trying to figure it out. And then Carol threw this thing out here and I said, oh my God, that's a fantastic line. I mean, we're never going to come up with something that good. And so that's when she called Peter, and she's right. I mean, it's funny how it plugged in, but the rest of the lyric, I think Carol and I did a nice job on, but clearly that lyric, it's the chorus of the song, and it's a wonderful, wonderful sentiment. But that's my understanding from Carol, that's where Peter came up with the line.
We should talk about the highlight of your career, Lemon's theme.
Yes. Well, a big fan of the show, big fan of Tina's, didn't know her. She had a little excerpt in one of her last episodes where she sings this little bit that sounds kind of Arthurish and mentions me. So I just took that little bit and I just flushed it out into a full-on production track. And I sent it to her. I didn't know her, but I got Jimmy Fallon, who's a friend, to send it to her. And Tina flipped and loved it and was very gracious about the whole thing. So it's been nice because I got to go to dinner with Tina in New York, and so we kind of become friends. So it's fantastic. But she loved it, and Lauren Michaels told me that she just played it like every day. So it was a lot of fun. But it's all based on her character. And of course, the last episode of 30 Rock, she marries Christopher Cross, and I asked her, if that was an homage, and she said, definitely, And I said, well, too bad it's not for real. And her husband said, she has a husband. But she's just unbelievably fantastic. And of course, my daughter, Madison, who actually produced the Yacht Rock documentary that just came out, is obviously a huge fan of Tina's being female and Tina being such a ceiling breaker and stuff like that. That when I went to dinner, I got to take my daughter to dinner with Tina, and that was a big dad moment for me.
Wow.
Tina's really, really lovely.
What about being name checked in The Simpsons? You know you made it when The Simpsons refer to you.
That's always a big one. And I think there's another show in the States, Family Guy, which I've also been mentioned in. So, and of course, it was a Seinfeld episode. And when those things happen, my phone just blows up. People freak out. Simpsons talked about you, or Seinfeld said something about you. So it's funny how those, and Mike McDonald gets a lot of that too. And there's pop culture stuff. It's exciting. It's fun. I think the Family Guy one, I'm a big fan. And actually, Chris Griffin, the son on that show, is named after me. Every once in a while, the mother will say Christopher Cross Griffin. So I'm a big Seth MacFarlane fan. So all those things are just really cool moments in your career where you really really embrace them and feel very. They're a sign of the fact you've had some success and people recognize you, which is nice.
Every second ad I see on television in Australia at the moment is for a liquor ad, and it features sailing as the theme. So hopefully, when you play that song here, everybody doesn't walk out and go to the bar.
Yeah.
Just
Well, I'm used to that too, but yeah, well, I wasn't aware of that, but whatever, better alcohol than some things. But that's funny. I did not know that. I mean, you wouldn't believe the stuff over the years. One of these big burger chains they wanted to record Ride Like the Wind, use Ride Like the Wind, and they wanted to call it Ride Like the Fries. Of course, I said no, but so whatever works. I think the song is. I know that I'm very proud of it because, and if people ask me what's the best song I've ever written, I would certainly say "Sailing." And when I'm in the supermarket and I hear it, people ask me what that's like, and I said, what that does is tell me that I've in some way written a classic song that'll probably be around forever, and maybe a Muzak version or some other kind of version, but it's a song that has a long life, which is, I guess, the real testimonial of a good song.
and what a career. It must be incredible to think that 45, 46 years ago, you put together a body of work that we're still around in 2025 talking about today.
Well, that's the thing. I think, Paul, I think that's the thing with yacht rock that it's bringing it to a younger audience. The same when NSYNC recorded "Sailing" on their first record, it brought it to a younger audience. And I think that the great thing about the whole thing with the yacht rock, we have some mixed feelings about it, but it's really about the quality of the production, the songwriting, the musicianship of those records in that period of time. And I think, for me, that's the real deal. The real players playing real instruments in the studio. It's not done in a can. So. I am very proud of the era that I was associated with and all those artists, Michael, of course, Toto, Steely Dan, Paul Oates, Kenny Loggins, they're all great artists, and I'm very humbled to be part of that.
And I guess that's probably a good summary of what the Christopher Cross entire catalogue's about. You could dissect every single instrument on every single album, and it becomes a masterclass for that particular instrument.
Well, and I think everybody would agree, and the documentary touches on this, that Steely Dan really is the reason for all that, because I think especially Asia, I was a fan from the first record, but Asia really introduced that jazz idiom into the music, and I think all of us at that point were chasing that rainbow. How can we make a record that sounds like Asia? And I think that's what I always tried to do, and that they were kind of my guiding light through that. And I think that's true. A lot of artists would say that of this era, that Steely Dan was sort of that's what you wanted to reach for.
Well, I can't wait to see your music live again and with Toto this time. It's a pleasure to talk to you, Christopher Cross, and good to see you in Australia next month.
Thanks. I hope to meet you in person. I'd like that.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us here at Noise 11.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you very much.